walk to the middle of the avenue of eternal peace.
Well, all right. Welcome back to the Survival and Basic Badass Podcast, Kevin and Chuck. Well, today, I think we have a good one. We're going to talk about throughout history. There's been some big disasters, and it turns out you can learn from disasters. You can learn from mistakes. Turns out when you see what other people went through, when you know your history, you can actually, learn from it. Maybe not make the same mistakes and repeat things. Like maybe we don't have to constantly go to war and fight each other or whatever. Like you could do whatever. We don't have to just riot in the streets. Whatever. So one of the big ones that comes to mind when I think like disasters, I mean, obviously it changes how much it affects people, what the long-term consequences are, but there's a lot of things. And I don't know. We're going to get into it. And all I can say is you definitely want to stick around because the second half, we're going to go into crazy tinfoil hat conspiracy land. So it's going to be worth it. Right. And also, make sure, subscribe. That's the kind of thing that gets those things pushed out. So, if you guys appreciate this content, make sure you're hitting the buttons, right? So anyway, let's jump into it. Chicago fire. So 1871, again, nobody ever knows the cause. We think that, the lantern, Miss Bessie's lantern got kicked over in the barn or Mary's or whatever it was. And it just started getting out of control. Well, What really happened? I mean, what were the outcome of the Chicago fire? First, I could tell you 17,000 buildings. That's a big fire, Kevin.
That's a big fire.
100,000 people were left homeless afterward. Because remember, like most structures were wooden, at the time. But maybe it cleared the way to build nice new metal buildings and take us into the future. I'm just saying. Anyway, and slow response, right? It was bad. So you have a loss of home. You have, because the fire speed was insane, once that stuff, and that fire is terrifying.
It's not a way that you want to go,
No.
When they burned witches at the stake, they were like sending a message,
and they weren't happy about it. It turns out when they burned witches at the stake. So yeah, that's definitely a thing. They also had it ends up water access goes away. Your community who gives you aid, goes away. Like on a bigger scale now, like we always have FEMA's going to come in, the Red Cross is going to come in. And obviously most people have varying opinions of how helpful or how efficient they are. But
I don't know if FEMA's coming in anymore though.
I heard they might be going away.
Scrap that. Yeah.
I have heard that. Now, what about all those stockpiled MREs and bullets that they have? Do I get those?
I don't know who gets those. You know what I mean? They're probably just going to sit in a warehouse for the next 500 years.
Yeah. Or we can find it at a government surplus website. If you guys see it, let me know. Let me know where to go. All right. Because that's going to be a thing. So Chicago fire. Basically, it exposed how vulnerable people are. Now, I don't know. I mean, so to me, the takeaways are, one, the modern day, right? We live in the modern day. We're not trying to recreate the moment that we had in 1871. But can fires get out of hand? Well, there's certain things you can do, right? You can have your smoke alarms. You can have your fire extinguishers. Because that's the thing. Like you have this small kitchen fire. It doesn't have to be a giant crazy fire if you have a fire extinguisher there. Or if you're like, oh, I can put
baking
soda on it.
If you have a grease fire on your stove and the fire department shows up right away, they're going to destroy your kitchen. They're going to destroy your house. Everything's going to be soaked in water. There's going to be muddy footprints all through your house. They're going to destroy your house. If you have a fire extinguisher, though, it just costs you the cost of replacing a fire extinguisher.
100%. So But that's to me is the first like obvious takeaway, right? That's your big, yeah. So then, but the thing is, you might have neighbors who have a little bit less standards when it comes
Uh-huh.
to home protection, right? Turns out their house might catch on fire and you might not be able to control it. No,
Right.
if you see their house engulfed in flames, yeah, hey, I can come over and try and help and I can call 911. Hopefully that works and whatever. But bottom
Yeah.
line,
I had a friend I
beyond
had
our
a friend that ended up homeless because their neighbor's house burned down and it was so hot it damaged their house to the point where the fire department wouldn't let them move back
wow.
in.
And that's a reality. So think about that. So there are things that are beyond our control. Uh, but do you have somewhere to go? Do you have kind of a network of friends or community that you can go, hang out with or save you, Um, so a lot of these themes are going to be redundant of things that, you can do, like storing supplies in multiple locations so they don't all get destroyed.
Mhm.
Things you can take away and go to different places, right? Knowing escape routes, one, to get out of your house, and two, to get out of your city, your town, your whatever. If you live in the suburbs or in the city, God forbid, you need multiple paths of egress, that
Mhm.
you can not just to get out of your building, but to get out of the town. Because, 9/11 things turn bad. All these times we see that there are possibilities that an emergency could happen where you got to get,
Mhm.
and you need to kind of plan for that. So that's number one. Next one that comes to mind was the Dust Bowl. Now, the Dust Bowl is a whole other game. Now, this happened in the 1930s and actually in 1930. And, basically, it was rough. I mean, just nothing. And you just could not grow anything. But you got to realize these people were wearing masks over their face. Like they
Mhm.
couldn't even breathe. And to me, the takeaway is they shouldn't have listened to the government because that's really where it all went wrong.
Yeah.
Because basically, the government had them clear all the fields, or this is what they say caused it, right?
Mhm.
And they basically just cleared land like crazy, and there was no grass or anything, stopping it. And it just created a dust storm like nobody's business that kept getting worse and worse. And it just eroded and threw dust around. And you're basically in like a snow blizzard, but with sand. And it just destroyed everything. So it basically lasted about 10 years. And it says, it was basically, everybody kind of agrees it was poor farming practices. But again, they were doing what the government told them to do, which
Right.
is what's crazy. But basically, 300,000, and these were the people growing the food for the country. So it kind of was a problem for everybody, right? Because
Right.
you had the roaring 20s and then the 30s turn to shit. This was a big part of it.
Mhm. Right. It was a huge part of it. And yeah, do you remember you ever read Grapes of Wrath when you were a kid?
Mhm,
Yeah, I
mhm.
mean that book was all based around that. And you're right, it was poor farming practices and it was people that owned their own farms all lost their farms. You
Yes.
know, big corporations bought up the land
Yeah,
and basically turned into homeowners and farm owners into sharecroppers. Anybody that stuck around ended up poor and anybody that left ended
right.
up poor.
So the big thing is like you lose your crops. You lose so one, it's food that you're growing for yourself, but a lot of it was wheat and stuff you're shipping away. People aren't
Mhm.
feeding your family on wheat, but you're feeding your family on the dollars from the wheat and
Right.
that kind of thing. So food and water scarcity, big deal, right? We talked about the air quality, but if you were a prepper and you had long-term food storage, obviously wouldn't have lasted 10 years, but hopefully you'd have some redundancy in your plan of these are other ways. Like to me, my normal plan is I can go to the grocery store and get food. My redundancy is that I can farm and I can hunt and trap and know how to do things on my property. And I raise rabbits and I do different things. I have chickens for eggs. That's the redundancy. Now, the Dust Bowl, would it have taken out my rabbits and my chickens? Yeah, probably. These were things that ended up getting devastated. So I understand. I mean, in this one instance, but you learn that redundancy, unexpected, can happen. Right. So having that stockpile, but we also talking about having your financial house in order, right? Having your money squared away where you're not desperate in debt. And hopefully you have a little saving stockpile. That's one of the goals we're all working towards. And you have that savings where you could, move. You could, buy up the land, not be forced to sell to the corporations, different things like that. Because, I mean, stuff was just worthless at that point. People were selling stuff for pennies on the dollar, as far as your land and getting out of Dodge. So having barterable stuff. But even now, like if they had N95 masks, there were actually people dying from breathing in all the stuff. It was insane. All the kids were getting lung infections and it was nonstop. So, planning and preparing for these things, these are, things that you could have as a takeaway. Kevin, you have some other disasters?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about, head outside the country for a little bit here. This is China. It was the Yangtze River flood. Now, this is probably the worst natural disaster that's ever happened.
All right.
So it was August 1931. There were huge rains, and the mountain snow melt combined flooded the Yangtze River so much that it flooded out cities. Entire cities were destroyed. Everybody took off, but they went to the surrounding areas, and there was not enough food to feed everybody, so everybody started starving to death. Because of that starving, there's malaria, measles, and cholera all broke out, and all sorts of people died of these diseases because they weren't able to access clean water. Ended up killing 2 million people. And I mean, the big takeaway from that is that sometimes when they have these natural disasters like this, you get stuck in a situation where, due to no access to clean water, you're drinking not clean water and end up making yourself sick and making things 100 times worse.
So you're saying the takeaway is buy Life Straw?
Buy Life Straw. Have some way to clean your water. I mean, just in a general way, you should know how to clean water at your house if the power goes out, at a bare minimum. Have a camp stove where you can boil water. Have some bleach or chlorine that you can treat your water, and know the ratio to use, to make that water clean. Know how to, filter some water and disinfect it, and don't end up with cholera. Cholera is one of those bacteria that makes you just shit constantly.
And it could be prevented. That's the thing,
it could be prevented. And one of the things that happens is you're shitting constantly like that, and you're not able to clean yourself up properly, and you end up spreading the infection to other people. So,
Kevin, that sounds gross and horrible.
Have extra bars of soap, and have clean water and a way to access clean water.
These are things we talk about, though, is learning how to filter water, having water storage at your house, having ways to access, having wells. Now, again, if the river overflows and that's actually getting into your well cap or whatever, there are things, that we can't control, right? We all understand that. However, there are steps we can make to increase our odds by a lot, and learning how to filter things is going to help by a lot. And, having the tools, having bleach on hand, having the storage stuff, is, a huge takeaway. One of the things I was going to share with you guys was that I had bought, Sam's Club sold the concentrated bleach, and I bought a 3-pack and whatever of these, gallon jugs of concentrated bleach, and I just stuck it in a dark closet I have in like a shed that I have. And I was like, oh, that'll be good for forever. Well, I went back like, I don't know, 2 years later, and I was like, oh, let me check on that. And I picked up one of the bleach cans. All three were just completely empty. Like it just dissolved the containers and
And sunk out
dumped
over
it out,
time,
is
huh?
gone. And yeah, so it turned out it was good that it wasn't in my pantry in the house. Although you're saying, well, if the temperatures were right, you probably wouldn't have had a problem. But yeah, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
Piss.
Well, you're not supposed to put plastic containers directly on concrete because it does
And
over
this was
time it does
not though.
damage it.
This was on a wood floor in a
Yeah.
it was, I have like an outbuilding, we'll say
Oh, okay.
that,
All
yeah,
right.
yeah, it was in the and it was in a dark, supposedly cool place, but apparently not cool enough.
Not
Anyway,
enough.
don't know what went wrong, but it was bad. So just keep an eye on your stores. That's the takeaway from that lesson. All right. 1933. Let's talk about the gold standard. Now, this is a man-made, I would say, disaster. I think this actually hurt our country. I think this, caused problems. So basically, it's crazy because they dropped the value of the dollar 40% overnight. And that's a thing. So gold was selling. I actually have some good notes here if I can find them. Yeah. Okay. Gold was selling for 30. Basically an ounce of gold was $20.67. And after they reevaluated it and said, yeah, your ounce of gold's now worth $35. But basically I guess we got to get the order of this. They seized everybody's gold and they paid you $20.67.
Right.
But say the value of a gold,
Ounce.
certificate was now worth $35 was what they said after they took your physical gold.
Right. After they bought it for 20, it was
after they bought it
twice
for
as
20,
much, almost twice as much.
Basically, if you had $100 in 1932, this is crazy. In today's dollars, that $100 would be $750. But wait, work with me. It gets crazier. If you had $100 in 1933, that's worth $450 in today's standard. So that's how much wealth they actually robbed from you, if you were that guy. So you're like, well, Chuck, then what's the takeaway? What could I do? Well, my first takeaway is hide your shit.
Don't give them your gold.
When the government says this is a good idea, say no.
Yeah, I mean, that's really one of the major takeaways is don't listen to the government. When they tell you they got a great idea, be super suspicious of it.
Finally, you guys are on board. This is what I'm talking about. And that's where you need to.
If they ever try and pass a bill that says the Patriot in the name or free
or freedom
in the name, freedom, liberty in the name, it's fucking terrible. Whatever
affordable
it is, whatever it is, it's terrible.
The affordable care, right? When you thought it was going to get more affordable when you did that, no, the Affordable Care Act did make it affordable for some people. But if you're the working man, maybe not so much. But if you're the not working man, it did get a little more affordable. Give them that. Or the I work less man, if that. All right. Anyway, sorry. That was my own personal ugliness. My ugliness was showing, Kevin. But, all right. So, yeah. All right. So, turns out it just basically was a good lesson for everybody on economics, but it also made us think, hey, having the ability to create things, the more one of the big things I push as a prepper, and I know a big thing on this show is that if you make everything yourself and you're not dependent on the currency, if you barter amongst your friends and you're not dependent on trading dollars. If you have the ability to fix things when they break and deal with it and not have to buy a new car, if you have the ability to put the deck on the back of your house and not have to pay an outside guy, you have a lot more control over things that happen to you from outside. And that's the takeaway, like how I would say you could prepare for something like going off the gold standard or a devaluation of your dollar. If you have a garden in the backyard and you have chickens putting out eggs, you're less scared when prices go up in the grocery store. I mean, that's the legitimate takeaway. I mean, and that's that whole self-reliance we're always building towards. Everyone's like, oh, homesteaders are crazy, get close to nature. Oh, you're just a bunch of hippies, y'all smell like patchouli. Well, I didn't really go for that, but I'm just saying, you get the idea, right? But it's more, the more you have the ability to take care of yourself, the more control you have against outside forces, the more protection. So that's my takeaway on that. Now, earthquakes?
Yeah, well, let's talk about the earthquake in Haiti. That was 2010. I think most of you guys probably remember this one. It was it was a pretty big deal. It was a 7.0 earthquake, which is big, which is pretty damn big. That was January 12th, and then they had an aftershock of 5.5, 5.9, and then a week later they had another aftershock of 5.9. A 5.9 earthquake is pretty big too. Now, it's not really clear, but it was about 200,000 to 300,000 people died during this earthquake.
Wow,
and the reason
insane.
that they don't really know is because entire families were wiped out. They didn't even.
Right. So
nobody's complaining, right? And the thing is, there historically there is earthquakes in that area, and they were supposed to be building with like earthquake resistant,
right?
But
you don't have the budget and the resources like they do in LA.
They were so poor that if you're building a house and it's going to cost an extra 80% to build it earthquake safe, people can't afford that. Either you have a house that's earthquakes, either you have a house that's not earthquake safe or you don't have a house,
Right. So it's a hard takeaway.
One of the issues was efforts by citizens and international aid groups to provide assistance, food and water to survivors were hampered by power failures, loss of communication lines, and roads blocked by debris. So they couldn't even get to, the people that were in need. They had UN people there, to provide aid, but their buildings were destroyed too. And so they didn't even have anybody on the ground, to help them get started and get set up.
And then the Red Cross just stole all that money.
Well, 60%. 60% of the hospitals were destroyed in the earthquake. So, there's nowhere to go to get help. And then when rescuers finally did get there, they introduced cholera to the river. And we're just talking about that. Like these disasters, you can't access clean drinking water. Well, at least we've got this big river right next to us and we can, get something to drink. And now everybody's got cholera and you're dying of dehydration, even though you're right next to a river. And it just compounds things and makes things worse. And I understand if you're in an earthquake, even if you have stored water, it might be destroyed in that earthquake. But having a way to filter water and understanding how to clean water is a big step up.
Yes. And that's the thing. It's over and over. It's redundancy. You plan different ways. You have a way to filter water. You have water storage. You have your own water supply, a well or whatever. And at least thinking about it, right? Like, hey, I know in the small town where you live, there was a restaurant and down in the basement, there was just a well hidden there that from yesteryear, and everybody's on municipal water and whatever. But there's that old well. Well, knowing about those things and knowing where stuff is a huge resource, and knowing how, hey, we can supply the community by, everybody can come fill their buckets. It's better to be able to come fill your bucket and get clean water than to not have clean water, right? Carrying water sucks, but not having water sucks more. Or having water filled with the poos, not good.
And wash your hands with soap after you have diarrhea.
Was that a thing? My wife's always telling me that. She's always like, you could wash your hands. And I'm like, why do you think I pee outside? I'm just saying. That's maybe a thing.
But I mean, a lot of these natural disasters, the big takeaway with a lot of these natural disasters is cleanliness and being able to access clean drinking water.
Right. Redundancy. All right. Now I'm going to flip back because that's like Kevin, natural disasters in an ugly world. And I kind of went, my mind goes a little conspiracy, a little, the government's always looking for an opportunity, no, don't let a crisis go to waste. You've probably heard these things, right? Well, turns out there's some man-made disasters that people believe may or may not have been allowed by governments, caused by governments. There's some crazy people out there who believe things. And I'm just saying, I've been watching a lot of InfoWars lately. So, who knows, right? I'm just saying. All right. So turns out September 11th, 2001. Kevin, it was an ugly time for
remember
America.
that.
All right. So obviously I'm talking about planes crashing into the World Trade Towers, planes crashing into the Pentagon, planes trying to go to, wherever the White House, I think, was the last target is what they believe. I think they officially decided that was true. I don't know. I mean, obviously there was a plane there. How do you know what's in somebody's heart or where they're going? I don't know how they get there. But so when that happened, 2,977 people were killed. And that's, between all of it. But not only that, right? Huge destruction in the city, people overwhelmed, things, collapsing, falling apart, jobs going away, stock market crashes, all these things, consequences that you can kind of prepare for. You can't prepare for a plane to crash into your building, right? I understand that. All right.
I actually went down to New York City on a BMX bike, riding around, checking it out afterwards. And a lot of people, they weren't talking about it, but like there were a lot of broken gas lines. There were a lot of like power that was running through those buildings, power cables.
Yes.
Power was disrupted everywhere. Like there was a lot
and it's
wider damage in infrastructure than just where ground zero was,
Like you figure how much damage you can do with a backhoe when you don't call before you dig in the city. And you could take out, 1,000 homes worth of phone service and stuff. Imagine when you collapse infrastructure like that. And I got to say, the World Trade Center was a hub of everything. Like it really, and it went deep into the ground. It was significant. But also you have takeaways like they shut down cell phones. Do you have a way to communicate with your family? Do you have a plan of where your family is going to meet if there's a disaster and you can't get in touch with each other? These are takeaways that we could, actually implement and have a plan. Talk to your family, talk to your people about what you would do if something happened and you couldn't get in touch with each other. Because, it sucks if you're all out looking for each other and they're already somewhere safe. You just didn't know. They say, when you have a house fire and one guy's waiting on this side of the house and the other guy, the rest of the family's on the other side of the house. And you're like, oh no, they're gone. I got to go back in
or tell the firefighter there's somebody in the house and they have to go in there and risk their life looking for somebody that's already out.
Absolutely. So these are things, takeaways is having a plan. And that's one of the big takeaways from 9/11. Now, here's where it gets tricky. I would say there were other consequences to 9/11 that were more than all that horribleness we just talked about. You also got the Patriot Act. And as Kevin pointed out, when they say Patriot Act, it's not very patriotic. And it was funny because like the Republicans put it in and the Democrats were like, oh, this is the worst thing ever. And then it turned out the Democrats were in charge when it was time to renew
And they
it.
were, yep.
And they were like, yeah, let's do it. And the Republicans were like, this is so bad. You shouldn't do it. How dare you?
Right.
And then the Democrats were like, nope, we're doing it. And then, yeah, and that's pretty much how we play the game.
It's always awful when the other side is doing it, but when we do it, it's fine.
Right. And we also got the TSA. Turns out you used to be able to go on planes without people like looking at your butt, not touching your butt and patting you down, and you know, all like
I went through there, and I don't know if it's the beard. I don't know what it was, but I was randomly selected, and they tested my hand.
They knew about the podcast.
They tested my hands for explosives, and it came back positive. So
because they're always like, you have gunpowder residue.
So I had to do like the whole search. You know what I mean? The whole 9 yards. Yep. I got to keep my clothes on, luckily, but they felt everything.
Nice. Did they touch you?
It was very. He used the back of his hand. He said, "I'm going to use the back of my hand." So yeah, dude, I know what's going on here. Settle down.
Is that how that works? Like, if they use the back of their hand, they don't get the joy from it.
I mean, is this what you wanted to do with your life? Touching junk with the back of your hand? You know, is that how you want to spend your days? That's how you want to make your living?
Right. We obviously have a militarized police that came out of that. And if you've ever walked around New York City and saw the people with the M16s, or at least I don't know whether they're full auto or not, they probably don't trust the cops enough to be full auto.
You're right. But
either way, they walk around with assault weapons is what we'll call them, because I heard that on the news that they're assault weapons.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you something. This is a quick sidebar, but I had somebody mention something to me that made a lot of sense. And he said when Democrats talk about like taking your guns away, that they're not going to take your guns away, they fully believe that. They think they're telling the truth. They're going to take away assault weapons, and that's different than guns. And that's
right. Those are weapons of war.
That's why in their mind, they're not lying when they say they're not going to take away your guns. They're going to take away assault weapons only, which can cover anything. They also
said they were going to. Right. We also had huge financial privacy rights that were lost, you know, after 9/11. That's when they really started pushing the ID card to open the bank account and monitoring the, you know, all this stuff. Like it had to be like a federal ID. Like before, you could go in with like a birth certificate you printed out at the library or something and be like, hey, here's my, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, that's what birth certificates look like in Illinois or whatever other state that you're.
Yeah, you don't know. Yeah, no, they write them in crayon in Montana. Right. So, you know, that's how they do it. This is just what it's
supposed to look like, man.
Yeah, exactly. So, again, that's where, you know, it's funny. They say, oh, use like VPNs and, you know, the Tor network for privacy and Signal's the big one. It's funny because they talk about Signal. Me and Kevin use Signal, whatever. And they're like, yeah, that's private. Turns out they're monitoring all that. Like if you think you can, you know, get away, like the government. Yeah, no, they know what you're doing, dude. Signal is not as safe as you think. But again, I don't have something to tell you this is more safe, right? I don't have something like, oh, well, if you do this, they won't be in your business. But being aware of your privacy and the things you say is a big takeaway from that. If you have supplies or stores, it turns out you can then avoid kind of surveillance and monitoring. Now, when you get the My Patriot Supply, a sponsor, I'll put a link in the show notes. When you have the My Patriot Supply order, then it's like, oh, that guy's a little crazy. He's somebody we need to watch.
You know, I mean, they're already watching you. You remember when it all came out that the government was actually spying on us and tracking all our phone calls and text messages, and nobody gave a shit? They're still doing that. They're still doing that. So
yeah, maybe that's one of the biggest disasters is that we didn't respond when Snowden came out.
We were all like, "Oh, he must be a traitor." That was what the government pushed, that he was a traitor. Even
they had no problem.
Yeah, I mean, betraying the government and betraying the people is two different things, but you know,
it is. And that's, yeah. But also now, so now people don't fly as much, turns out. Like, I wonder how the numbers actually tracked on that. But I know when I talk to people in my world, they're a lot more reluctant to go on a
Oh
flight.
yeah,
You know,
100% in
obviously,
my
when you
case.
get into the norm, yeah, when you get into the normal routine, like you're a guy who flies for work and you go every weekend, you kind of are like, all right, this is the hassle I have to deal with, and you accept it and you learn and
Mhm.
move on, right? I understand that. Like we all, but your average person, it's kind of a pain in the ass. And to be honest, I would make an argument if I have to be there early because I don't know if they're going to pull me and screen me for an extra hour investigation, cavity search, or whatever, then I'm giving up my time that I could just be driving and getting closer there. So if I'm not like going all the way to the left coast or something, um, I'm reluctant to even get on a plane. You know, it isn't as exciting as
Yeah,
it
yeah.
sounds, you know, going flying
Family in
anymore.
California that I don't visit as much as I normally would.
And we can blame the TSA
Yeah,
and for
exactly.
that. Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, here's another takeaway. So Waco, now that was a
That was a
disaster.
disaster.
Yeah, now you're like, well, it's not a natural disaster. No, I didn't. That nope, but it's
It
a
was a
disaster.
disaster. And it was
And
Janet
all right,
Reno. Ugh, she's a hard woman to look at.
1993. We're blaming Bill Clinton and Janet Reno. A 51-day standoff that killed 76 Branch Davidians, and I would say kind of a crazy cult, but we don't really know.
They're
I
all
mean, that's
dead.
again
Yeah,
how
how
the
could we
government
know?
painted it. Yeah, I didn't talk to these people, but basically the ATF was like, well, they're not doing anything bad, but I think they might have some machine guns
Yeah,
in there.
so if you think somebody has machine guns in their house, you should make a
We
big
should just burn them
show
down.
of showing up and then kicking down their front door. Nothing bad will happen.
Yeah.
It'll be fine.
Nope.
It'll be fine. They're definitely not just
So
standing inside there pointing machine guns at the door we're trying to break down.
yeah, exactly. And so that got you like, you know, that was a step in militarized policing, not near the step of 9/11, but because 9/11 instigated like selling actual military vehicles, like as soon as they were like
Right.
decommissioned kind of thing, they started turning them over to police forces,
Yeah.
and
No, I mean,
it was crazy. And a lot of
honestly,
federal
if you're
training came
in
from
the
yeah,
police force or you know somebody in the police force, find out what kind of equipment they're using that's not just the regular bulletproof vest and pistol.
right. What do you have that
Yeah,
I can't
exactly.
get?
Because
Right.
it's a lot. You know, there's a lot of them that
Right.
have
And
armored
that
personnel carriers. Like, bro, what the fuck?
right. That's what actually got you the 1994 assault
Mhm.
weapons ban, which they checked it out and they were like, "Oh, it didn't have any effect banning assault weapons."
Yeah.
And so then they got rid of it cuz they proved that it wasn't working. But then other bad things happened in 9/11 and they were like, "Oh, the assault
Mhm.
weapons ban. Nobody's ever tried that," cuz we obviously have the memory of, you know,
Right.
something less. I would go back even earlier. Anyway, so there's a couple things, takeaways on that. Fortify your home, barriers, cameras, things like that. Might be a good takeaway. Build a prepper alliance, right? Basically, if you associate with other crazy people, then they're going to
And
come
this is
after
one of
you.
the things that
So I'm not sure
actually
that helped.
helped them out in Waco, the Branch Davidians themselves, was
Oh,
an ATF agent went up to the mailman and asked where the address was for where this place was with this address. And he just went over there and was like, "Hey guys, from my church, this ATF agent was just asking about you guys."
yeah. You might want to
Mhm.
hunker down and keep an eye out. So yeah, actually having a network could really help. Um, somebody like, you know, I hate to say, but I mean, to be honest, a 51-day standoff, that's pretty
It
impressive.
is. It is to
Like, could you
be able to
pull that
survive
off?
just in my house for
Could you
51
not go
days
out for
would be,
resources for
yeah,
51
would be a
days?
lot.
Probably not. I mean, I imagine they shut off the power, and you know, these
You
people
think they'd
probably
like
pretty
let
hardcore.
Uber Eats through? You know, if I was like,
Well,
listen,
I
I
mean,
know
Kevin,
I'm
that
going
would
to
be
need a Big Mac in the meantime, you know?
Kevin, that's cruel and unusual punishment if you stopped
Yeah.
Uber Eats, right? That would be bad. No, absolutely. So then Reagan getting shot, obviously. Pretty cool president, I'm just saying. But that got you the Brady
Right.
bill. And that, again, gun rights,
For
a
how
lot of things.
conservative Ronald Reagan was, he was definitely instrumental in passing a lot of gun rights violation laws in
He
California
played
as governor and in the
things.
United States as president.
He did get better after California, but yeah, no, he's not the hero for gun champion that you think he is. Then I would move on to Katrina.
Yeah.
Right? Obviously, disaster destroyed New Orleans and how beautiful that whole area. But then they went house to house taking people's guns away. I mean, that's a lesson that we can take away, right? Is that they went and took people's only way to defend themselves. And then here's a takeaway that you could actually actionable step. They were like, well, if you don't have the receipts for all your guns or when you bought them, who has the receipts for anything you buy?
Especially after a major
Then
flood.
You can't prove to get them back. So have copies of that stuff and keep it at your Aunt Susie's house in Montana when you live in New Orleans. And that way, you're covered either way. So redundancy is craziness, right? It's possible that you could maybe support gun advocacy groups, maybe call people when it's time to, hey, there's a bill. Maybe you should check on some gun rights. I'm just saying. Now, here's another crazy one because, man, I have a lot of notes. We just keep going here. 1992, Ruby Ridge, Randy Weaver, otherwise known as whatever actor that was.
Was it Dennis Quaid, I think, played him in the
Dennis
show?
Quaid, Randy Quaid. I think
There
it
you
was
go.
the other one. It was
Quaid.
the brother.
But
right?
yeah, he was a former Green Beret, if I'm remembering correctly, right?
Yeah, he was a Green Beret. That is correct. And the FBI shot his kid because basically I think that the dog was giving away the guy's position. The guy was laying in the ground and the dog started barking at him. And the kid, looks over what his dog's barking at. And then they end up like shooting the dog and guy doesn't identify himself or give any indication he's the FBI. He just sees crazy militia guy hiding in the woods or whatever. And the kid shoots at him. And then they mow down this guy's kid. It just ended bad. So having surveillance,
and he was acquitted of all the charges. Meaning he was just a dude minding his own fucking business.
And don't cut off shotguns. Don't shorten them for people, no matter how much they nag you. And I think one of the takeaways is no matter how persistent they are, like, you need to really cut this barrel for me. It'd really help out. Just no.
Don't do it.
No, ain't going to do that.
Don't do it.
Just saying. Just handle your own
business. Cut your own shotgun barrels short.
But anyway, so if you guys have some disasters that come to mind and some takeaways, if you put them in the comments, that'd be awesome. We like to hear from you. We like to know what you're thinking and see the other side of the picture. You can email us your thoughts also at preppingbadass@gmail.com. I don't know. That's what I got. Kevin, thoughts, concerns?
Nope, that's all I got.
All right. So with that, I would say stay safe and we will talk to you guys next week.